2022 marks the 7th season of Born in June, Raised in April, What Adoption Can Teach the World. And we kicked it off in January with Haley Radke of the podcast Adoptees On. We talked about reclaiming the calendar. We talked about grief. We talked about joy. If you don't listen to Adoptees On, please do. It's a great podcast. Then in February, in time for Black History Month and Valentine's Day, it was Hannah Jackson Matthews and her husband, Brett Matthews. We talked about relationships, love, racial identity. Hannah's work for transracially adopted persons is amazing, and you must check it out. Then in March, in time for Women's History Month, we talked to Susan Ito. Susan is a writer, a professor. I've known Susan a long time, and her work in adoption has been next level. Then, in time for April, I asked you to ask me the questions. It was a joy to sit down and reflect. You all sent in amazing questions. I loved reflecting, and I loved you for sending the questions in. Thank you so much. In May, in time for Mother's Day, it was a conversation with Amira Rose Davis. Amira is a mom, a professor, a transracially adopted person. Her gifts to the world as far as content and just her intellect is just amazing. Thank you, Amira. Then in June, in time for Father's Day, it was the rapping dad, also known as Derek Clark. Derek, he is doing such great work with the impact of trauma. We had a really lively conversation. Of course, he dropped some bars at the end. And then in time for July to talk about identity and freedom, it was Milton Washington, a Korean-American adoptee. Milton's story is outstanding, but the work he does today in fitness and photography is outstanding as well. Then in August, I sat down with my producer and nephew, Kyle Ferrer. We talked about back to school. Look, y'all, this podcast simply does not happen without him. Thank you, Kyle. I love you. Then in September, I talked with Steve Weish. Steve and I are in a new documentary about Colin Kaepernick. Steve isn't adopted, but he's mixed race, and we had an amazing conversation. Then in November, October. October was my birthday, and I talked about what it means to be adopted and what it means to be born. It was really nice to share my thoughts and feelings. Then in November, I was able to sit down with Cassandra and Julia. Their journey of sisterhood and adoption, y'all, this is the longest podcast of the season, but it's worth every minute. Please listen to it. Please follow them and listen up. And then, in December, it was Nathan Ross, and Nathan and I had a conversation about the holidays, about his journey of adoption and identity. He's changing the world, everyone. Thank you for an amazing season. See you next year.